Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fire Chief's role in response to electric vehicle incidents. I am BJ Jungman, Vice President of the Great Lakes Division of the IFC. On behalf of the Great Lakes Division Board of Directors, we'd like to thank you for attending today's session. A few logistical items to cover before we get started in the webinar. Please introduce yourself in the chat. So if you can find the chat in the right-hand side and introduce yourself with your name, your department, your role, and what drew you to this session. The audio today is being broadcast using VoIP technology through your computer headset. Please make sure your speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is turned up. Audience microphones have been muted. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact the IFC support at webinars@ifc.org or via the chat function. In the upper right corner, you will also find the chat and QA menus. You're encouraged to share your comments and submit questions for the speaker. I would ask you to use the Q&A function, which is the second tab over, if you have a question. If the presenter will have handouts in the handout section on the right, and then you'll receive a link with today's recording via email after we're completed, as well as a survey. Please let us know about your experience today. I'm excited to introduce our Great Lakes Division President, Fire Chief Pat Parker, who will introduce our great speaker for today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the Great Lakes Division Education Series. The Great Lakes Division is working hard to bring relevant topics that bring value to you, the fire service. In recent times, we all seem to be hearing about battery-powered this and battery-powered that. Everywhere we turn, we are hearing about electric vehicles. We're fortunate today to have with us Michael O'Brien. Mike is the fire chief of the Brighton Area Fire Authority in Brighton, Michigan. It's a growing community about 45 miles northwest of Detroit. Mike is a past Michigan Association of Fire Chiefs president. He sits on numerous NFPA and International Code Council committees. Chief O'Brien also serves on the board of directors for the International Association of Fire Chiefs, representing the fire and life safety section. He's the leading IAFC's efforts in lithium-ion battery response for the fire service. The work group has provided resources on EV, electric vehicle incidents, ESS, energy storage systems incidents, and is working to create a lithium-ion toolkit for the fire service this fall. Mike is quickly becoming the fire service's go-to and subject matter expert on the topic. Mike also consults with some of the big names in the industry. Without further ado, I'll give you Chief O'Brien.
Hey, thanks, Pat, and good to see everybody's names rolling in from really across the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes is just a powerhouse, and there's no doubt that the Great Lakes region is truly leading now that our Big Three Automotive has really gone full into this battery technology. And as the fire service, I think probably most of us are having this feeling of being a little bit behind right now. And hopefully by the end of today, we're going to give you some tools that really you as leadership within the fire service can start to tackle, because there's some tough things that we've got to discuss and prepare our firefighting staff and our company officers for. And so when we start to really look, we have a whole bunch of things that deal with batteries. And this webinar today is predominantly as it relates to electrical vehicle that could be full battery into hybrid. And just know that the chemistries are rapidly changing. We could sit here today and discuss about all the different chemistries, but that's probably part of what we need to know to be equipped and prepared. But really, arguably, it's whether or not it's hybrid or gasoline or a traditional style motor. When we look at batteries, we have this life cycle that really is part of our overall response that is affecting us much more broad than just a finished vehicle driving down your interstate or freeway or found in a garage. To make batteries, if you go back, first of all, we used to only have a very small fraction of companies in areas and regions making batteries. And as Tesla, really, who changed this market, expanded and really started to push other manufacturers to get into other areas. We had to start to look at how do you increase this battery making capacity? And quite frankly, with some of the newest work done by our federal government here recently, we have this huge rush of creating the next best battery chemistry, the next best battery type, the next best length and duration of battery. So it's not anymore just about making lithium ion batteries or lithium ion phosphate or maybe one of the many different types. We're going to start to see a bigger rush within the fire service, not only for labs, lab space, and testing, which is going to charge us. But for today, we're predominantly going to talk about these EV response. So how do we get there, right? We have raw materials that are shipped from throughout the country, from overseas, that come in and they make a battery. So if you go back to your high school chemistry days, there's an anode and a cathode, and it's put into a usable format to create stored energy. Now, some manufacturers might use pouches or a flat style design. Others are using cylinders, maybe something that looks like a large D battery. And they make these cells. So we take raw materials, we coat them onto an anode or coat them onto a cathode, run them through large ovens, industrial ovens, and we create batteries. Well, before those batteries go into a module or into a battery pack for a vehicle, they get tested. So they have no stored energy really at this point. They get some energy and they're run through a process to make sure that that cell is going to hit the mark that it needs. So if you think about this, it goes from 0 energy to 30, maybe up to 50, up to 100%, and then we bring the energy down. Most of the time, we want to hear this number. So if you have a facility that's storing battery packs, that's storing cells awaiting manufacture, we really want it in that 30% or less state of charge category. So as they come through, they then take these cells and modules and put them into packs that go into our cars. And we're going to show a couple slides to where they go. And so really, whether it's EV, consumer electronics, stored energy systems, they start to use batteries. And the overall goal is there's only going to be so many charges. It's like your iPhone, your Galaxy, Samsung, whatever phone you have. Have you noticed how the charges get down over time? Well, that's part of what all of our auto manufacturers are trying to do and tackle is really how do we create that battery that's going to take and continue to have charges and not need to be replaced. But at some point in time, whether it's due to damage, whether it's due to end of life, whether it's consumer to EV, we've got to take these battery products and collect them. This is probably happening all over your jurisdiction right now. Go into any of your big box retailer. They are probably gathering and recycling cells, whether it's in the form of a charge pack that goes into a drill or a Sawzall or a weed whip, all the way to we've had Chevy batteries recalled. So what happened to those batteries? They're getting collected and then they go into storage awaiting recycle and they're back on our roads to head out to a recycling facility. And there's not that many yet in the United States, although the technology is going relatively quickly. And what's really neat is, or what the goal here is, when we go to recycle these batteries and cells, that raw material is getting reproduced and sold back to manufacturers to make more batteries. So just put this in the back of your head, because although we're focusing on energy or electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles today, there's a lot of transit in this process, moving raw materials, moving cells, moving battery packs, replacement battery packs to your automotive facilities, moving cells awaiting recycling. You can see where this cycle would affect us on a roadway, which, unbeknownst to us, and they're accidents for a reason, could become involved into some kind of incident that our firefighters need to respond to. And I would think this is a very typical response here. The picture in the upper right-hand corner, right, these are some Tesla superchargers. In our region, they're becoming more and more popular, especially those of us along 94, 75. You know, Tesla really has this robust charging. But it doesn't take much to start to see that GM has a partnership coming up with Pilot. There's a lot of state and federal grants to get the charging network up to speed. So how do we equip our firefighters to be responding to incidents that may or may not include charging, right? And so you think about it from a fire service perspective, we've been pretty good, or maybe it's the never-ending fire chief thing, of trying to get our staff to build pre-incident plans of buildings. Where's the electric disconnect? How do I train our staff with maybe something like that Tesla when there is an event? Because accidents do happen. In the lower right corner, you can guess the big box retailer, but recently down in South Carolina, I could not find any gas-powered equipment in the entire facility. So you think about some of our big box retailers and how they might sell lawnmowers and everything else. There is a complete transition here from gasoline, diesel to fully electric. I think as fire chiefs, we've had some concern because the likelihood of us finding gas-powered chainsaws, vent saws, K12s is rapidly changing. And I think a lot of times we're looking at the performance on the fire ground. And then here, ancillary, the picture on the left is the result of a fire. And these are stored, those gray packages you see are energy storage systems. So energy storage systems use very similar technology. Instead of it being in a car, it's mounted to your home, mounted to a business. Maybe it's even grid support. And I'll give you a resource on this, but there was a fire here in a construction trailer, probably due to charging of consumer electronics, that caught on fire. And these battery packs awaiting storage or waiting install, so they're being stored, catch on fire as part of the process. So as fire chiefs, our fire environment is changing for our staff very quickly. And we have questions. Will the sprinkler system work? What happens to my automotive repair facilities that maybe don't have sprinklers? How do they store where these are going? And I think there's a lot of questions. So I think it's important for us to look at a couple things here. There's been a lot of news reference battery related fires. No pun intended. It is a hot topic. And quite honestly, it's a defining moment really across much of the United States and much of our metros. Now it's coming to everybody else as well. I'm going to have a poll added here in a second. We're going to throw a poll up about whether or not you have responded to an electrical vehicle incident. So if you hit polls in the upper right-hand corner, you should be able to answer this question. And while I give you a minute to answer this question, if you have responded, when we start to look at this totality of incidents that are occurring really across the world, we have this big bucket right now of mobility and consumer grade incidents. And these could be personally owned, commercially owned, rental charging type things. And these are mobility. These are big mountain bikes with big battery packs that can go 20, 30 miles an hour. It originally started, I think, for most of us with hoverboards. We've seen it now in scooters and the whole electronic. India is having a huge issue with lithium ion scooters and that style. And so we've been responding to these incidents, and I think the demographic is much different. You know, the city of New York in its high-rise structure is much different than Brighton, Michigan, where we're never really more than 5 stories off the ground. And we would be able to just really remove that from the building. Where in New York City, when you're on the 50th floor of a high-rise, you can't just end up getting it out. And so really, when you start to look, and I'm just trying here to make sure I figure out how to close the poll. Nan sent me a message as I was talking. You know, how that response demographic works in the city is much different than most of us in suburbia. When we have a fire with one of these events, we're going to get that unit outside. Now, the fire may occur because of inappropriate charging, the inappropriate cable, the inappropriate whatever. It could be a damaged cell. It could be a damaged battery pack. And so when we start to look at that cue, that is consuming our media, and it's caused some fatalities, which as fire chiefs, we need to be progressive. And if we're seeing spikes in this, we need to change our marketing, our messaging through social media, through what we're talking about to what our crews are seeing, and helping to educate our public. Maybe buying chargers from Five and Below isn't the best option anymore. We should be matching our charging equipment to whatever it is. Now, ancillary to all this, in this other bucket, we have these EV related or hybrid related incidents. Now, all of our manufacturers across are really trying to create some fantastic products. And I'm not trying to slam any of them, but I live, and I think you all live, in a world where we don't know always what's going to happen. And some very unique things happen by accident, by intention. And so our crews have to be prepared. And as fire chief, I want to make sure I'm preparing them. So when these vehicle accidents, fires occur, I want to make sure our staff are properly prepared. We have recycling fires. And uniquely, this isn't just the collection, the storage, the transportation. This picture on the right is a facility holding battery cells awaiting recycle. 55-gallon drum, which hadn't moved in probably in excess of 3 months, caught on fire. That's concerning for us as a fire chief. One bucket or one 55-gallon drum on top of a rig, and as crews put water in it, this thing boiled for nearly an hour. And crews can do wonderful work, but we have this recycling. But in addition to the storage, awaiting recycle, whether it's inside, outside, on transit, we have inappropriately disposing bad cells. So you're going to be able to see that they are disposing of cells inappropriately, which then end up in our transfer facilities. If it's going to a landfill, I think most of us are like, oh, okay, if it gets crushed and creates a fire or goes into thermal runaway, that's one issue. But when we are seeing it in transfer facilities, indoor facilities where a smaller trash vehicle dumps its load, product is moved around and then put into a larger vehicle, that when there are events, you're seeing a spike. So when we start to talk about community risk reduction, when we start to talk about predictable, preventable incidents, us educating really in all of these categories is going to be a change. And as fire chiefs, we got to make sure we're driving that message home. And of course, we have this energy storage systems. This is that built-in, may or may not be with photovoltaic, maybe in a home, maybe in a commercial setting, maybe grid support. And I think as one of the questions that continually comes up is, how are our grids going to support this transition to EVs? I think that's a never-ending question, but one is to build capacity and build storage, right? So private-public utility partnerships with large fields of energy storage systems the size of semi-trailers that can push power back into the grid at some point could become a response for us if it hasn't already. If you look in the West, Australia, overseas, it is happening in quite many locations. And I think it's important that not all batteries just create fires. Sometimes they catch on fire because of manufacturing defect, accidents, collisions, many different reasons that you can think of. And I think if you really look at your apparatus fleet right now, what do you have that's electric? You may already have some staff vehicles. Your fire inspector or others may be working around or not. And as I look at the closed poll, this is very fascinating. Nearly 50% of you, we're about split, 50% have responded to a battery-related incident. You think about that, that's pretty significant across the board. And so remember, and if you look at your fleet, our extrication equipment, I don't know as chief if I'm going to buy hydraulic equipment much anymore because of the strength of and the flexibility of our battery-related equipment. So hopefully everybody scanned this and grabbed the IFC response to EV fires. This came out of an initiative out of President Ken Stubing, who really was looking for us to really start to provide some resources. And I think this is a great dialogue for us within the fire service. It not only was really taking experts in how we start to look but whether or not, really, what questions do we have to be doing from pre-incident? How do we start training our staff and prepare our staff all the way over into the next. So when we start to look at the pre-incident response for us, is how do our staff start to understand really what they're starting to. This picture here shows you manufacturers have a completely different style of how they construct and how they put their battery packs together. So when one cell, if you look in the upper right-hand corner here, as you look at that, this manufacturer, in order to try to limit what it would be thermal runaway, is they're utilizing some individual cells that are kind of contained, and there would be wiring connected as well as some materials, but has created their battery packs. On the next, or within the lowers, we've got what would probably be a Ford F-150 as well as a GM. You can see that they use more of a solid box style battery pack. And part of in this pre-incident response is understanding that each manufacturer is and will be slightly different. If we can go to the next slide, Nan. And as we start to look through these, training of first responders and getting information into the hands of our staff is key. Now, maybe it's us creating and working with our command staff to better understand our policy, but how do we at first give them this general understanding of what they're going to encounter, what it's going to look like? Now, some of this we understand, some of it is still open, and probably what we talk about today is slightly different than what we're going to know in 6 months to a year, especially as we learn more information. And this could be both for vehicle extrication, or any of the various ways that we may respond. One of the things within that pre-response that I really encourage you to do is get that operations staff together and have a conversation. And really these conversations need to be, number one, how do we get the tools that we're going to talk about today in the hands of our first responders when they need them in incidents? So how do we build quick links, rapid links for our staff, whether it's a vehicle that ran off the road and is found in a water source, or is maybe located, is in a severe pin-in style extrication, or it's a vehicle on fire. We must, one of the things that I'm finding with our staff as we do more show and tell is this just general understanding, right? Take, for instance, do we have the equipment to crib this vehicle from moving forward back on our responding apparatus? If we are deciding to extinguish this fire with water and we're anyway without hydrants, how will we get 8,000 gallons if my fire engines only carry 500 gallons at a time? And then more importantly, right, how do we understand what the different firefighter measures are? So many of our manufacturers are providing training to our first responders in many categories, and it's been relatively well received. And I think it's important that we continue to send staff to those as they become available, or their webinars or the like. And I think it's important that we really keep trying to understand. But let's go through a couple things here. This burn or to burn, probably one of the hardest things any of us have to do. But when would we say a battery should just consume? Part of the difficulty here is that when a battery pack is in thermal runaway, are we able to stop that battery pack going into thermal runaway? And so when you start to look at many of the response guides that are provided to us.
So, hey, well, let's get caught up. I don't know where you lost me, but I think we're on pre-response. Nan, can you go to the next slide for me? So this question on when do we let it burn or not really becomes something that's hard and difficult for us in the fire service. And that discussion to let it burn versus large volumes of water is very difficult. So if we have a human trap, there's exposures to the structure, or you're not sure what to do, water is the answer. It's not foam. It's probably not carbon dioxide. It's not a Rosenbauer piercing system. What it is whether or not we should put water on this incident. Now, I think when there are vehicles that are actively charging, right, our crews are pretty well trained in that environment of how do we turn off or stop that electricity flow to that charging. So if it's commercial or within a building. Now, think of it this way. We have a vehicle fire in a garage, and whether it's because of the vehicle or something else in the garage, the fire service has responded to thousands of vehicle fires in garages that may have started from the vehicle or may have started outside of the vehicle. So for us, when we start to look at this and we get those incidents, one of the things that really needs to come to mind is how can I remove that vehicle from the structure? One of the changes in the paradigm here is this goes from a 30-minute or less incident. Your crews right now across the United States, Canada, can put out a vehicle fire in 20 minutes flat, have the hose packed up, 500 gallons of water, and they're off the road. Whether or not we decide to let it burn or whether or not we're putting water on the vehicle, this is going to become a much longer incident when that battery pack is involved. Now, if it is not involving the battery pack and it's the inside or it's a compartment fire, put the vehicle out like you would any other time. But really that discussion that you and your command staff need to have is, when are we going to just let this burn? And your crews are going to feel awkward. You as a chief are going to feel awkward. But really, it's part of understanding that we cannot stop this process from occurring and where it's going to end up. So really have this discussion early. And as we go to the next slide, it's really part of the whole pre-emphasis here. So when we have those exposures, get it away from the other exposures if we can. So it may be requesting or utilizing a winch on one of our fire department apparatus or requesting a tow company to get it out. But if we do go to extinguish, you're going to need large, copious amounts of water. So run that drill. If you're running 500-gallon tanks on your fire engine apparatus, you don't have access to tankers. How are you going to do a sustained flow on the freeway if you don't have access to a hydrant? Maybe you're not on a freeway, you have access to a hydrant, you can check the box and say, look, we can sustain flow for the couple hours that this is going to take. And maybe for others of us, it's going to, hey, we've got tankers, tenders, and we're able to get that large volume there. So really this whole exposure question, when we have entrapment and exposures or we're deciding to extinguish, you've got to come up with a plan of how you're going to get large water there. Next slide. So as we start to progress through, so we've decided to let this burn out, we've decided to extinguish it, or maybe we had a vehicle that has a very compromised battery pack. No fire, no off-gassing, and I should probably back up. Part of what thermal runaway looks like, it can present as this white, gray, thick, black, gaseous smoke. And if anything that you see in that response guide, our staff needs to be in full PPE and SCBA anytime they're working in that environment. That gas is, just put it even more so, we know how combustible smoke can be. Smoke is fuel, right? It doesn't change when we have batteries off-gassing, and the chemicals and the properties within there are creating us other bad environments. So likewise, we, more than fender benders, but vehicles that are under very heavy impact, we truly need to work to have a post-incident plan. Plenty of social media has covered various incidents across the world in which vehicles caught on fire somewhere down the road. And so we need to have that built-in relationship with our tow provider and how they're going to tow and when they're going to call us back as well. Now, one of the things that really has come to light in our work that we've been doing is some of our police providers, when vehicles are part of a crime, they're deciding to store those vehicles inside a building. Now, if it's an average, the vehicle was just stolen, that's one thing. But if the vehicle went off-roading and it's got a compromised battery package, or it was involved in a very high speed, storing that vehicle inside is something that we have to have that conversation with law. And as we go to the next slide, law, DOT are very key partners in all of this in how we respond. Likewise, as our charging network starts to develop, having that general understanding of how the charging works, what's its role within our community and space, but more importantly, how do we control the energy from that stored unit in? So think of the accidents or incidents that could be involved that we see already. Have you ever had somebody run into a fuel pump? Have you ever seen somebody drive away with the fuel pump still plugged in? What happens here? And I think you'll find that as you start to explore these with your staff, right? For instance, if my electric vehicle is plugged in, most of them you can't get driving down the road. It won't let you. It's a little bit smarter than our fuel system, which I think as a fire chief, that's pretty good. But from time to time, accidents happen off roads that run into charging stations. So what guides and what do we have? And as we go to the next slide, you'll start to see that there's a lot of robust materials for us. And I think the big emphasis has really been on vehicle extrication. So some of our electric vehicles are becoming harder and harder to identify. There is no standard marking. So, right, as our crews respond to vehicles right now across, however, as they approach, right, we want them in the appropriate personal protective gear. We want them to make sure they're protecting their work zone. And then as they start to come around, right, they're going to do these inner and outer circles for safety, and just really emphasize that looking for what the power source of this vehicle is important. And I would just encourage you, very simple drills that have nothing to do with extrication, have nothing to do with vehicle fires, is get to your local dealers and just look at the new mechanisms of how we put vehicles in park, how they go into drive, and all of that. How do you open the doors? Some of these are very complex vehicles, very, very smart. So when we start to look at this, how do we secure that vehicle from movement? And one of the things for those of you who are blue card organizations, I think as we arrive, our company officers are very good at saying, hey, we've got a two-vehicle accident on X, blah, blah, blah. It is after they do their inner outer circles, when they've discovered it's an electrical vehicle and there's auto extrication, bring back that information that, hey, this is a Hyundai XYZ, it's a hybrid. Now, indications that it's a hybrid vehicle. It has a charging port as opposed to a fuel cap or a fuel spot. It doesn't have tailpipes, are all good indicators, or there's a lack of a motor if the hood is able to open. So let's go to the next slide, and you'll start to see some of these resources within that guide, or if you go on your phone or internet and you type in Emergency Response Guide Ford F-150 Lightning, you can see here that Ford's done, just like all of the manufacturers, have done a really good job to utilize a standard response guide for our first responders. But with the amount of vehicles, we can't expect our responders to have these memorized. So one of your action items should be, is how do I create a quick thing on our CADs and our computers in our system to be able to pull these up? And quite frankly, why can't we just print these and put them in a 3-ring binder in our responding engines and chief vehicles? So if you see here, that orange is that high voltage. So when we start to talk about vehicle fires, vehicle extrications, right, off-gassing from that sandwich below the seats would be an indicator that we have cells in thermal runaway. Now, the reason these vehicles are so difficult to put out, think of it this way. If I put a bunch of battery cells into a refrigerator and close the door, and I said, hey, you got to put that fire out. So the product inside the fridge has all the oxygen. It has all of the various things that we need. How do you put that out? And you would have to wait for it to burn through, or it's the only way. And so once it burns through, it's like our attic fires. How do we put out an attic fire right now? Well, if it hasn't burned through, we either go on the inside, we pull some sealing and put water on it. You cannot do this. If you look at all of the response guides, us puncturing holes into battery packs is a bad idea. There have been a couple incidents where we've had horrific accidents where the underside of the vehicle was compromised, and it provided direct access. So when we start to talk about large copious amounts of water, you're essentially having these thermal runaway events of these cells inside this pack, and you're waiting for it to burn through. And so the Ford F-150 here is just one. And on the next slide, you'll see here that we have even more options, right? This is the Hummer, a very popular vehicle that's around the Midwest. You can see that their battery pack and power distribution are in different areas. And I think it's important as you start to look through, it's not only from a fire standpoint, but from that vehicle extrication standpoint. Now, one of the things, go ahead and slide over to the next slide, that we really start to look at, this is where we're all learning in this together. And I look at as our automotive partners as really being something for us that we really have to work on in seeking to understand. So on the left is GM. And so all of the response guides, if you pull them up, they flow in the same flow. General overview, in case of fire, in case of submersion, vehicle extrication. Now, look at number 7 on the left. This is the Hummer, right? It says the high voltage battery isolation in the vehicle chassis. If the vehicle is immersed in water, you will not be electrocuted by touching the vehicle. After the vehicle was removed from water, do the following. Cool, right? And Eric, you have a great question here about how do you get access to these diagrams? All you need to do is search that vehicle. And if you look at that IAFC response guide, you will see that NFPA has done a beautiful job of the pre-2021, and then you really just have to add to it. So on that IFC response guide on the left, you're going to have a direct link to all of these resources, or just type in Hummer GM response guide. The best site for ease of getting to is Tesla. So if you type in Tesla emergency responder guides, you will have all of these guides in all of their vehicles, in all of their manufacturers, the charging and everything else. So look at the Ford one on the right. And this is where I just want to bring it up. If the vehicle is submerged in, hold on, I'm going to start at the top. Damaged electric vehicle submerged in water, potential high voltage electrical shock hazard. Exercise caution and wear appropriate PPE, including high voltage safety gloves and boots. So Ford has a much different thing here than what GM, Tesla, and other manufacturers have. So what I would say is make sure as we're training our responders, let's be realistic in what we see. We're going to see vehicles off roadways into water. We're going to see vehicles at high speed. We're going to see vehicles smoking. We're going to see vehicles on fire because the vehicle next to it caught on fire. So how do we prepare our staff? And these response guides are critical in that we're giving them an opportunity. One of the things as we go to the next slide that I really try to tell our staff is, hey, when you see a new vehicle on the road, find the response guide for it and go through it as a crew. Because really, I think there's a great opportunity that exists in that training, right? So if you have a Hyundai or a Kia dealer, an Audi, Ford, GM, Chrysler, it doesn't matter to me. They're all getting electric vehicles. Go make friends with them and say, hey, listen, we don't want to damage your vehicle. We just want to go through the general. We want to get an understanding of how to open the doors, how to put the vehicle in park or drive, because it can be slightly different. Rumor the new Trailblazer when it comes out. If the key's in your pocket, you put your foot on the brake, you put your foot on the gas, it goes forward. Feels like a golf cart, right? And so I think it's something that we're going to keep learning. So just in review, and then we're going to answer some of these questions, and I sincerely apologize about the connectivity issues. This is a changing fire environment for us with very difficult discussions. Print the IFC response guide. Sit down with your command staff, go through it, develop a training program for your staff that's specific to your policies and procedures. And then once you start to get that, go to the next level and start to build up with your staff and with your elected officials, with your police chief, and have that discussion that these events may no longer be 30 minutes. And I'll give you a great, for instance, if we pulled up the Tesla response guide, it says no foam. And I think these are part of the things that we have to make sure we're making robust. I know it sounds simple. I know there's a lot of snake oil coming to you as a fire chief. I am trying to be very factual and honest based on what the manufacturers are saying are the best techniques. we're either going to let it burn, consider letting it burn, or if there's exposures, people trapped, we're going to put water on this incident. Now, here's some great next steps for you. First, review those procedures and get it to your community leadership and have discussions. Because it's going to take all of us, whether or not we decide to extinguish a car fire on the roadway. It's different from a 1-engine response versus a 5 or 6 engine response shuttling water versus 30 minutes versus 2 hours. We need to make sure that policy is updated. We then, one of the most important things here is to make sure that we're starting to equip our fire prevention, our inspection, not only with marketing and consumer and best practices, but how do we start to help them as it relates to what do they do when they start to see this in the field, and what are some of those best practices? So I know, BJ, some questions have started to pop up. You want to start to go through those?
Yeah. Thanks, Chief O'Brien, for the presentation. We appreciate your time and expertise. Someone had asked right about the time you had cut out about electric versus hydraulic tools and why you recommended the electric.
Oh man, that's you know, what I would say is we're just finding that our staff is so fast now, and we've had just a lot of issues. We're a big Hurst user. We cover about 27 miles of freeway, and our staff is just really raving over battery powered. And we have just found that the power is more of what we need now. Do I think I can get rid of them in the long run? Man, I don't know if in my career we're going to go away completely or not have at least one vehicle with hydraulics. But I'm thinking in the future it's going to get harder and harder to have hydraulics because I'm not sure. I'm just not sure if the manufacturer is going to be there. So what I would just say is I would encourage you, get your hands on some of these newer vehicles, cut them, and utilize the different ones.
Perfect. Next one is there any safe way to store EV, the electrical vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters indoors? And then are the EV charger stations inside residential structures safer than other device charging systems?
Yes. Yeah, so right in homeostasis, when we have good batteries, good chargers, let's just talk home electric. This is something for the consumer electronics that we are all learning to market a little bit different. And one of those is, you know, we have got to educate our kids. We've got to educate our families to use the right charger. And if you're experiencing problems with that battery, stop charging it. How many times will we have consumer electronic fires where somebody goes, yeah, I ran over my kid's car and he continued, you know, he's got an RC car. He ran over it and he continued to charge it. And now we have this. Or we dropped our battery operated drill off the roof and it's not quite holding a charge, but we're still charging it when we're not home. Those are the things that we've really got to be careful of. Now, just like we did on the hoverboard 5 or 6 years ago, that change in scooters, e-bikes, where people buy them from, whether or not they bear a listing stamp are important things. And we need to educate our public on what those are, that they're using the right charger for the right device. And if there's ever issues with the battery, to stop. Now, let's change to EVs, right? All of our homes are going to have at some point in time batteries mounted to walls, and they're going to have battery-powered vehicles in garages. So our statement really comes, there's 2 types of charging you're going to see in the home. One is out of like a 110 and the other is a 220, right? If they're starting to utilize, right, we want people to utilize a licensed electrician in your state or your community to install those devices. We want to make sure that people are utilizing the right charging equipment for the vehicle. And if they're ever experiencing problems, you know, to stop. Now, really, for us, right, in homeostasis, when the car's good, the charging's good, these things just don't ignite rapidly, right? But utilize listed equipment, the right charger, and utilize an electrician to put them in really is something that we need to make sure we're promoting to our communities.
Very good. Is there any study shown if F500 is effective versus straight water? So you mentioned a little bit about foam earlier, but if you could elaborate a little more, that'd be great.
when we start to look at F500, one of the things that I think we all have some concern on with F500 is just that large use. And I think we're going to see more, whether it's with F500 or it's some other product, that we just want to make sure that it's being used in large formats before we go out buying a bunch. And right now, one of my biggest concerns, multiple of the response guides, when they say the vehicle's on fire, pull up any of the Tesla ones, it says, do not use foam. Now, the question you could say is F500 foam. So I think there's a lot of potential there, but again, I want to continue to see more studies. I want to continue to see more stuff. Right now, most of the manufacturers, based on the knowledge they have, are saying water.
All right. How about any environmental concerns with the runoff from the extended water effort?
Yeah, so this is a big question, and there's been a couple informal studies. One of the bigger things, most of what everybody's seeing right now as it relates to water runoff on a standard vehicle, it is not anything different than any of our current vehicle fires, both the smoke and or the water. One of the things, though, when you're starting to do 8,000 to 10,000 gallons, some of the things that people are seeing is a difference, really from the water in chlorination. So what I would say is right now, there's nothing to support it. Part of what we want to do in this toolkit that the IFC is going to release is I want to be able to give you factual information. So this is one of those areas that I am really trying to work to make sure that as a fire chief, as a fire service leader, you have something you can fall back, because that is a big issue that a lot of community leaders are asking.
All right. And just there was a lot about the runoff. So
Yep.
Any issues with dragging the vehicle causing issues with the regenerative braking system causing more current?
I don't think for the area that you're going to tow it is going to create that issue, right? I think for the most part, it's about protecting the exposures and getting that vehicle right. Let's say there was a fire in our garage and the vehicle and the battery pack were part of the fire because of this other fire in our garage, we need to get that out. And so, really, I think it's one of those things that look at the response guides, look at it, and very much really just try to have that information to your tow provider. Here's a great one. You think about how many times on one of our accidents a tow truck puts one vehicle on a flatbed and tows the other. If you read most of these tow guides, all these vehicles are going to end up on flatbeds. And so we've got a little bit of a change.
Perfect. On the Tesla Model S, there's no way to open the back doors from the inside when there's a loss of power. Have the automakers worked at all with fire and EMS to discuss these types of issues when it comes to accident response?
Neil, that's a good question. What I would say is all of the response guides have a great series of information, not only where their disconnects are for their low voltage, but remember, we can never get rid of the high voltage in any of these batteries right now. There's disconnects for the low voltage, but never the high voltage. And what I would say is, what I have found is in most of the models, if there is a way to get through this, in the response guides, there is something about how to open the doors when there is a complete loss of power. You bring up a good one on the Model S. I'm not sure, but we continue to have, I think Tesla's been a great partner in having open discussion about some of the challenges our firefighters have seen.
Perfect. What about from a code perspective? How have you been dealing with requiring a remote disconnect in a reasonable location for the charging stations?
I think this is something that you're probably going to see coming up a little bit more. There's no doubt the code environment will be a big question. And what I would say is, I think in the commercial setting, one of the biggest things we can do in the commercial setting is get that pre-incident plan built so our responding staff knows where any disconnects are, not just remote. So I think you're going to see a little bit more coming out there on those.
Perfect. We're running up on time. I'll give you one last question here. Someone asked, what's your opinion of EV car fire blankets in cases where there's exposures?
Again, it's like anything else. I think there's some big opportunities across on all the market. Some people have found some success with it, others haven't. And so as fire chief, right, I think the blanket and other things are the least of my worries. Right now, my focus would be, when are we going to let it burn? When are we going to put it out? And, right, does our staff have the tools and expertise in all the different types of incidents? We know this environment's going to change, and I'm so grateful, BJ, to you and the Great Lakes for doing this. And I'm sure somewhere down the road, we will probably need to do a follow-up on some of the built environment as well. And really, as this toolkit comes out here from the IFC in the next probably 60, 90 days, I think hopefully it's going to help fire chiefs start to work through some of these big issues.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate all the expertise you've gained and all the time you put into learning about this. It's definitely an emerging issue. So on behalf of the Great Lakes Division Board of Directors, I want to thank everybody for attending today. You'll receive a link with today's recorded session by email along with a brief survey. Please let us know what you think about today's experience. And again, thanks for your time, and thanks to Chief O'Brien for his time and expertise. Have a great day and be safe.